The North American Mission Board posted a stat this week, which was pretty alarming. It said that less than 30% of North Americans say that a Christian has ever shared the gospel with them. Less than 30% of North Americans say a Christian has ever shared the gospel with them. And considering the fact that the last thing Jesus said on his way out is to go into all the world and preach the gospel, it's very evident that the church at large, especially in America, or at least in America, is failing epically at keeping the main thing the main thing. And I understand that the idea of preaching, because of tradition and culture, has been mixed in our minds of what that really means. A lot of times, when you look at me, you say, I'm the preacher. And I get called that all the time. Oh, he's the preacher, or he's the new preacher. But there's a difference, and a big difference, between a pastor and preaching. Preaching itself means nothing else. I need you to hear this because this is something you need to get going forward. Preaching, the word preaching itself means nothing else except verbally communicating the truth out loud. Out loud, not whispering it, not down low, but proclaiming it out loud to somebody else. That's it. Every single child of God has a mandate to preach the gospel. Every man, every woman, every boy, every girl has the responsibility to verbally communicate the gospel to other people. That is without question. Yes, we should live it out. Yes, we should do good deeds. Yes, we do community projects. Yes, we should be kind. Yes, we should do unto others as they would want done unto us, because those are all commands from God. But all of those activities have one purpose in them, and that is to open a door of opportunity to share verbally the truth that we have experienced. That is what it means to preach, to proclaim, to say, to speak the gospel. Romans 10:13 says, whoever calls in the name of the Lord shall be what? Saved. We know that. We know that that is the truth. If you want to boil everything down, that one verse, which is the quote from the Old Testament, is the verse that pulls everything together. It says that simple. Everybody who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And we believe that, and we say that is true. But then we ignore the very next verse, which gives us some very logical follow-up questions. How shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? How will they believe in him who they have not, what? Heard. How will they hear without a preacher? And the word there, the way it's used, really should simply say, how will they hear without preaching, without proclamation, without out loud verbal communication? We are responsible to share the gospel and the experience that we have had with Jesus, verbally, with other people who have not already believed. We don't get points for sharing the gospel with people who already know it, okay? We are called, every one of us, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, to verbally communicate the truth that we know about Jesus and how we've experienced him in our life. And if that's scary to you, you're not alone. I didn't say that it was easy, but it is very simple. Most of the apprehension we have when it comes to sharing the gospel, proclaiming it out loud verbally to somebody else, is due to our own selves getting tied up in thinking, I need to know all the answers, which is my biggest problem, trying to think 3 or 4 or 5 steps ahead to what they may say back to me when I start talking to them, and I get in my head, and then it begins to get in the way of me simply saying the truth. Or maybe it's that you don't think you know enough about the Bible in order to say it. Or maybe you think that you need to be someone who's polished and you have some salesman-type script memorized, and that's how you need to be, and that's just not you, so you just don't share it. But none of those things matter. There's only one thing that you need to communicate, and that is your own personal experience with Jesus. And that's exactly what we find in this text. Mark chapter 1 is the harmonic sister to Luke 5 and the healing of the leper, which we've been reading for 2 weeks now week 3. And I know, again, this is the third week, but this is a very pivotal point, and we're going to see that today. This is a very pivotal point in the ministry of Jesus and in the narrative that Luke is writing in his gospel. He says he's giving us an orderly account, meaning most likely Luke's account is chronological as best as he could tell. He has given us the order in which things happened. And he's going to give us a story, as he already is, about the rise to fame of Jesus, as well as the rise to infamy, which is what he's going to come into and face as he goes along in his journey. But look at verse 45, and this is kind of the end of this story. It says, however, he went out and began to proclaim it freely and spread the matter, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city. I'm talking about Capernaum again, but was outside in deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. Now, if you're here the last 2 weeks, you'll know that there was a leper, a man who was full, it says, of leprosy, a very advanced case of a very deadly disease. He had been isolated for many years, if that was the case, and he had come into town where he wasn't supposed to be because he knew there was a person there who was like no one else, and he had the inkling, the thought, the hope that maybe Jesus would be the one who could free him from what had kept him captive all his life. Because not only was he sick and dying, but he was unclean according to the law and culture, and he was not allowed to come near anybody. And he had been that way for a long time, as we talked about. And he comes into town and he says, Jesus, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus replies with the words we all need to hear at some point in our life, I am willing. Those few words were the difference between life and death for this man. He was well advanced in age and in his disease. He was going to die soon, and he was going to die alone because of the separation that the leprosy disease caused in this culture. No one would go near him. This was a matter of life and death for this man. And Jesus gives this man afterwards a strict mission. He says, go to Jerusalem, fulfill the law of Moses as a what? Testimony to them, to the priests, to the religious leaders of Jerusalem, to let them know that in Galilee there is a man like no one else, and that they need to take notice. But the man cannot contain himself, which is our text, and he just went out, and he began to proclaim, it says, freely, and to spread the matter. I want to speak briefly to you this morning about the power of one witness. One person. One man simply saying what has happened to him because of his encounter with Jesus and what he was able to accomplish because of what had happened to him. The word proclaim in this verse here, or it may say publish in your Bible, is the Greek word kerusso, which is the same exact word that Paul used in Romans 10:14 when he asked the question, how will they hear without preaching, without verbal, out loud communication of the truth that I know and have experienced? It's the same word. So preaching or verbally communicating is connected directly to being a witness. But I want you, again, we want to start off with this idea, as I said. Notice the simplicity of a witness. Look what the verse says. He, that's being the leper, went out and began to proclaim it freely and spread the matter. And to spread there, another Greek word, diaphemizo, means to report thoroughly. He did not just witness to one or two people. Every single place that this dude went, everybody heard his story. He could not help but share the life-altering encounter that he had had with this man, this teacher from Nazareth named Jesus. He blazed a 50-mile-long trail of good news from Capernaum to Jerusalem, where Jesus sent him, right? It's about 40 to 50 miles. And across that stretch of time, which if he was telling everybody, it probably took him a month and a half, or it took him a long time to get there. He was telling everybody as he went. And he finally gets there and he speaks it to the priests, as we'll see in a little bit. But simply notice this, the simplicity of it. It simply says he began to proclaim it. Obviously, asking good hermeneutical questions, we need to know, what is it? What is he proclaiming? The verse ends with the idea of the matter. He is proclaiming the matter, the event, the encounter, what has happened to him. I was sick, I was dying, and nobody would visit me. No one would come near me. I was unclean, and a man named Jesus touched me and said, "You are healed." He went outside of the bounds of the law. Not only did he approach, but he touched him. And in the ceremonial law of the Old Testament, to touch someone unclean was to make yourself unclean. So Jesus was not simply proclaiming he had the power to heal, but he had the power to override what everybody else thought was impossible. That he could be someone who could go into a life that was unclean and make them clean without taking it on himself. The context of what we've read reveals that this man was not having theological discussions with people as he passed. All right? Again, the simplicity of a witness. You may think you need to know all the deep ideas and questions of the world, and you don't. He's not arguing about the minutia of tithing mint and cumin like the Pharisees would do, or arguing with the Sadducees about their denial of God's word and the resurrection. He wasn't attempting to lead people down a little side quest of asceticism like the Essenes were, which was another sect of Judaism. He wasn't eloquent, he wasn't polished, he wasn't orthodox, he was not classically trained in anything. He was a man who had been isolated for at least a decade, most likely, in the middle of nowhere and had very little conversation with anybody. There is no history that he's a teacher or he's a leader or he's anything. He's just a normal guy who got sick and was isolated from everybody else, and then one day Jesus comes into his life, changes it forever, and all he does is go out and tell people exactly what happened to him. You don't need anything else. You have the story already. And it's so amazing because this morning in our young adults class, we literally talked about this very thing. And it was prompted from a men's group meeting we had 2 weeks ago with Brother Cody, who led it, and did the same thing. We asked, who is Jesus to us, and what hinders us from speaking that to other people? And I'm trying to tell you today, the simplicity of being a witness is that all you need is your story. You need to know what happened to you. When you encounter Jesus, that's all someone else needs to hear. Because that encounter, if it's life-changing and you've been born again, should have came in and changed everything. This guy would not be the one picked first for the team. And yet Jesus knew the only thing this guy needed was his personal story, his experience with Jesus. And he turned the nation upside down. That's what we're going to look at next. Look what the effect, the power of this one witness. Look at verse 45 again. He went out, proclaimed it freely, spread the broad matter. Why? And then what happened? To the point that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city. He could no longer just go in and out like he had been doing. Something is happening. There's something growing underneath. It's boiling under the surface. And he's outside in deserted or wide open places. And they came to him from every direction. You can go back over to Luke 5 now. I want to show you the effect that this one witness had on Jesus' ministry. To this point, Jesus' ministry had been regional. But Jesus, because of this one witness, is about to go viral in our terms today. He took a localized series of events that would have been considered just centered around this teacher from Nazareth, and he turned the nation upside down with the question that is this the one we've been waiting for? Obviously, the end of verse 45 there in Mark, it says the effect was they came from every direction because of this guy's witness, and to such an extent that Jesus couldn't even enter openly into the city, meaning there would be a riot or there'd be a crowd, which is the next thing we're going to see. But because of one witness, the eyes of the nation are now fixed on this most unlikely of characters, a carpenter turned rabbi from the hills of Nazareth. There's and you'll see it later on. They will even argue this. Nothing good comes from that place. He says, search the scripture yourself. No prophet arises from that place. It's unheard of. It is the boondocks. It is the outskirts. It's the place mixed with Gentiles. Nobody comes from there. It was something It was a scandal, really, to the people, as we're going to see. And here in Luke chapter 5, verse 17, we see the effect on the nation's leaders. This is why it affected Jesus' ministry so much. Verse 17 says, it happened on a certain day, and Mark tells us it's many days after he couldn't go back into the city, and so he waits a month and a half or so maybe, so that the things kind of cool down a little bit, and maybe he sneaks back in, and Mark says that once it was heard he was in the house, a crowd immediately forms. And so that's Mark's background to this verse here in chapter 5, verse 17. And so that's what's happening. He sneaks back into town. Everybody shows back up because they hear he's there, so he begins to teach. But notice who's at this meeting. There were Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting by who came out of every town of where? Galilee, of Judea, and where? Jerusalem. North, south, central, essentially is what you can think. From one end of the country, of what they would understand as being their country. They didn't have a country at that time, technically speaking. But from the Jewish mindset, it is the north, south, and the central piece, the very middle of everything they know. Every single town, as Mark said, from every direction, these people are coming. But not just people now. Now there are Pharisees, there are leaders, there are people who have authority who are at this meeting in chapter 5, verse 17. So it'd be for us like having a news story go viral and then the experts show up to examine the story and the character. That's in our terms today. Something happens, someone posts a video and all of a sudden for some reason it just goes out there and then people want to get in on it. Sometimes people are trying to get next to the next big thing so they can become the next big thing. Sometimes it's them trying to examine, is this real or is it fake? And they may be asking all kinds of questions, but no matter what, before this point, there are no real leaders in attendance to the teachings of Jesus. It's common people from every city in the area. This is a pivotal point in his ministry. Why? Because these, again, are the leaders of the who? Of the people. The ones who should fully grasp the magnitude of who Jesus really is. They've arrived on the scene. Theoretically, once they understand that these rumors they've heard are true, they should become the most powerful witnesses of all. They are the ones who know, it says right there, what does it say? Teachers of the what? Of the law. They know the Old Testament forward and backward. They were Pharisees, not Sadducees, it says, so they understood the entire Old Testament. The Sadducees only believed the first 5 books of the Bible. The Pharisees believed the law and the prophets. They believed the whole thing. So these are people who know not just the first 5 books, which even in that you could find enough, but from the beginning to the end of the Old Testament Jewish canon, these people are experts. They know that when Jesus says or does certain things, it lines up somewhere with what's being said in the Old Testament by the Old Testament prophets. These are people who the common people look up to and say, they are teachers. They're the ones who know. If anyone would know, it's these guys. And they are now on the scene. And they would be the most powerful witnesses to be calling the people to follow Jesus, not simply as a teacher or a prophet or even a healer, but as the very Christ. They ought to be the ones going home now and saying, Messiah is found. That's what should happen. Now we know, because we know the end of the story, or we think we do, that's not what happens. But it's very important as we study through the whole Gospel of Luke that you mark down that this is the point in the narrative where the leaders join the timeline. This is it. They're not there beforehand. This is where these teachers enter in. And from here forward, there is a storyline of the leaders being shown clearly, this is Messiah. And their growing rejection of him because he doesn't fit in the box that they want him to fit in. But you notice that this is the first big shift in Jesus' ministry since he departed from Nazareth. Remember, Nazareth is what? Hometown, local. Capernaum, it says he goes into Capernaum and around the region. He's regional. But now he is a national phenomenon. People from every single corner, and not just rabble who are there to receive something. But now you have the experts, the leaders who teach others. And they're here to hear what Jesus has to say. The end of verse 17, we will see the effect on the nation's people. The power of the Lord was present to heal them. Or really it says the power was with him to heal anyone, really is what it means. Jesus had the power, and they knew that. And then behold, men brought on a bed a man who was paralyzed, whom they sought, this was their intent, to bring in and lay before him. And when they could not find how they might bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the housetop and let him down with his bed through the tiling into the midst before Jesus. Now again, context is everything. Details matter. You should remember in chapter 4, every single person in Capernaum had already brought what? Anyone who had any sickness. And what did chapter 4 end with? And he placed his hand on every single one of them and what? Healed them. So these guys, bare minimum, did not come from Capernaum. They're not hometown boys. Mark 2 tells us that Jesus is in the house in Capernaum. Most likely it's Peter's house again. But as far as Capernaum's concerned, there are no more sick people there. So these 4 dudes did not just walk down the street with this guy. These guys are part of those who came from every direction. So bare minimum, they walked a few miles. Okay? And by the time they get there, the house is full, so it's probably close to noon. They have walked all morning from somewhere carrying a man who could not come on his own, right? This is not an easy thing. This is not a quick thing. This is hours. This is time. This is the effect of the one witness these men heard and came from some direction far away to bring this man in, it says, to put him before Jesus. Men brought on a bed a man, it says. And we can assume, like I said, they were late to the party because when they got there, they couldn't get in. And there's no telling how far or how long these guys walked to carry this man who had no power to come to Jesus. But the witness of the leper had prompted the compassion of these 4 men to such an extent that they were willing to do anything it took to lay, it says, their friend at the feet of Jesus. And there's a pattern we need to be paying attention to that's emerging from the stories we've read so far in Luke. Those who are well bring those who are not. We already saw in chapter 4 that Peter and his wife make request of Jesus for his mother-in-law, from which the echoes, as we said, reverberated out throughout Capernaum and its little suburbs. And they brought every single person who was sick that night to his door, and he healed them all. And then we just saw this man who was affected so much he could not contain the story of what Jesus had done to him. And now we see men bring a man on a bed who is paralyzed. The ones made well bring those who need to be made well. This is a theme, and you will see this all the way through this gospel, that those who know the truth are bringing those who don't. Those who are well are bringing those who are sick. Those who have power are bringing those who do not. And this is the same theme happening here. But notice the end of verse 18 and verse 19. And when they sought to bring him in, that is their intent. This is what they've walked all morning for. And to lay him before him. When they could not find a way they might bring him in, because of the crowd, they went up on the housetop, let him down with his bed through the tiling in the midst before Jesus. Now we could say a lot here, and a lot of people have said quite a few things in this section, but I'm simply going to ask you this question. How far are you willing to go to proclaim the truth of the gospel to somebody else? This is a physical problem, physical needs here, but we're going to see that Jesus does not deal with his physical problem first, which we'll talk about next week. And there's a very important reason in his order of his healing in this story. We know that Jesus is aimed at more here. At the end of the day, he is not here simply to heal everybody of their physical diseases that they'll still die from later on. He's here to deal with the real problem, which is what we'll see in the next part. But understand this, today, right now, you're not trying to bring people who are broken and need healing and leprous and all these other things. We're trying to bring people who are blind to the reality that Jesus has died for their sins and risen again, and that we can now live by his life. And not just live a life here, but have so much to look forward to in the future that it's unreasonable that we would ever keep our mouth shut about it. And yet we do. What will stop us from proclaiming the gospel to someone else? What will it take to stop you from bringing someone who cannot come on their own to Jesus? So many times, and I speak from experience, we have very good intentions about sharing the gospel with somebody. And we know we should do it. We know we have the power to do it. And if you have been changed by Christ, you have the story through which to communicate that truth, that you can relate to them. But as we talked about in our Sunday school class this morning, we allow awkwardness, societal norms, cultural taboos, or any number of distractions to quickly and easily deter us from this main thing, don't we? I mean, I 100% can sit here and tell you that I do not do what I ought to do the way I should do it when it comes to this main thing of sharing the gospel with somebody else. And I will let any number of things say, well, maybe tomorrow, maybe not this. Oh, I should, but I shouldn't. I don't know. And you get stuck in that middle ground when all you should do is think, man, look what happened to me. I'm just going to tell them that. And that's all you need. That's all you need. You need what this man had, which was a story. And look what he did. He not only changed his own life, he told people from every direction. And now the leaders are here. And now these 5 men have come. These 4 carrying the one. We know we should, but we don't. And these guys had every excuse to walk away. Sorry, man, there's just no way in. We've already done so much. We've done enough. How many times have you said that? I'm not going to talk to that person anymore. They always reject it. I've done enough. There's too much going on. We don't have time for this. We brought you all this way. We brought you this far. Maybe he'll pass you on the way out. Maybe he'll do it himself. We think people are just going to randomly get saved on their own. It doesn't happen. It's very clear. Paul said, you must communicate the gospel. Jesus said, go in all the world and preach the gospel. He said, go into the world and make disciples. You don't make disciples by osmosis. It must be a personal, verbal communication with somebody. He could have said, he won't listen anyways. We're tired. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe it's just not God's will, which is the worst excuse you could possibly ever use. The Bible clearly says the will of God is for all to come to repentance. And how does he choose to do that? By sending preachers, not people who stand on a stage or up here like this. This is one thing I do. But every one of us in this room have the responsibility to speak the gospel to the people that we contact. Some way, somehow. Ask for ways to do it. Ask for opportunities. Ask for the conversation just to go in that direction. But look for it and do it and share it. These guys are examples. Notice what it says. When they could not find, they tried. They might have laid him down, walked around the house several times, and they're sitting here trying to think, how are we going to get him in here? Man, I don't know. And maybe he's over here, man, it's okay, guys. It's okay. You did your best. And like, no, we're going to figure this out. We're going to get you in somehow, in some way. And they're sitting there thinking. And maybe the one guy's like, hey, we build houses like this. Tradition tells us that these men are construction workers. I should verify where this came from. I've heard this story once, so I probably should go into this. But if it's true, these guys were were carpenters just like Jesus was, which means they had built houses. They knew how they worked. They knew what they looked like. And they would say, hey, we know this house has a roof. It's flat. We know how to get up there. We've done this. We build these things. We could take it apart. Their story and their life experience, if this story is true, that they are construction workers, every bit of their life experience came into this one point where they used what they knew to bring a man to Jesus to do what they could not. The tradition says that the man was actually paralyzed because of a construction incident. So these guys are basically, more than likely, his co-workers. Putting it into our today's time. 4 men. They knew this guy. Maybe they had taken care of him after his accident. They didn't have disability or anything back then. They had taken care of him. And one day they hear the witness of this crazy old leper guy who says, man, there's a guy in Galilee who can do something about your friend. And they say, let's go. And they put him up and they take him in. And they get there and nothing can happen. It's too full. There's too many excuses in the way, but they didn't allow it to stop them. They said, let's use what we know. And they take him up and they let him down. If you're born again, if you are a born again believer, what will stop you from being a witness of your experience with Jesus? That's what you need to ask yourself. And whatever it is that most likely will stop you, begin to pray about that one thing. Maybe it's awkwardness. Maybe it's the inability to speak well. Maybe it's being too quiet. Maybe it's, you fail, the fear of failure, fear of rejection. Whatever it is, begin to pray specifically about whatever it is that hinders you and begin to think like these guys who used their ingenuity and their experience and what their life had been all up to this point to simply say, I'm going to get you in there. And maybe today's message could be a pivot point for our ministry. We have a long way to go. There's a lot of things to do. There are 40,000 people at bare minimum in Haywood County who do not know Jesus like you do. There's enough people in this county to fill every single church and still not be room in the house, just like it is here. But what do they hear? Do they hear from you? There's a man that we speak about every week who can do something for you that you can't do for yourself. Do they hear that from you? Do they hear the verbal communication? Not in perfection. It can be as unpolished as possible. You can have the most coarse language, and all you know is your story, what Jesus did for you, and you could tell it to somebody, and maybe it's that person that your story and your experience and your unique blend of whatever you are will finally reach that person who I could never touch. These men stopped at nothing to bring this guy in. They had worked all morning, and they weren't about to stop now. I'm getting in. We're getting in there one way or the other. And there are 40,000 people at least in this county who need the exact same thing. And we're the ones to do it. In your school, in your home, in your workplace. These guys were just this dude's co-workers. They worked alongside him. They could have just tossed him aside. Hey, you can't help us anymore. We got to go find someone else. But they didn't. Could Haywood County be turned upside down by what we do here at the Mount? What we choose to do with the stories, and everybody has a unique story. What you choose to do with your story. I'm going to ask you just simply bow your heads for a second. There might be somebody in here today and you finally realize you don't even have a story to tell. And maybe that's your biggest hindrance. You've looked at your life, and there is no moment where you say, I've encountered Jesus in a transformational way. Because Jesus does not come into a life. The Holy Spirit does not come into someone's life and seal them and fill them and give them a gift to serve, as we've talked about so much recently, and your life not radically change. And maybe you've realized nobody is just saved all their life. Everyone has had a point in time where they have met Jesus and he has changed them. And maybe you're here today and you've thought through it, and maybe you're a church member and you've been a church member for 50 years, and you realize, you know what? I'm not sure I've ever even met Jesus. I've never had a real change. I've never even had the thought of sharing the gospel with somebody else because I don't even know how to do that. I don't have any experience with Jesus outside of coming to a building a few times a week. If that's you today, I'm asking you to see me afterwards, and we need to talk. Because I can take you to that one who can change you, who can heal you. Not simply of some physical problem that's going to come back anyways, but of the sin issue and the division between you and God, who desires you to be his child. You can be saved today and changed, and I'm telling you that. Christian, if you're here today and you realize that you've never communicated the gospel to another soul, I'm asking you to begin to pray along with me. And I've told you before, I've admitted openly that even as a preacher, it's easy for me to get up and preach. It's hard for me to go out and open up some random conversation with a stranger about the gospel. It's not easy, but it is simple. Start to think through your story. Think about how you were led to Christ. Think about how your life experience can maybe relate to a person who doesn't know Jesus. Begin to pray for God to put people in your path and to give you that wisdom and the courage to move when He prompts you to speak to someone else about Him. I promise you, if today's message takes root, it will be the pivot point of Mount Zion Baptist Church. And we will see growth in here that we've never seen before. But it's on us. God is not sending angels down to this earth at this moment to proclaim the gospel. It is us. It is on us to proclaim the truth we've experienced with Christ.